Hey everybody, this is Henry, and I chose David Jonathan Ross as my designer of choice. I'm sure most of you know David Jonathan Ross. He's a typography designer and designer in general, and the founder of DGR Foundry, and he operates out of Massachusetts, so he's quite close by. One reason that I went with David Jonathan Ross is because of his more unconventional or unique perspectives on typography and its uses and its applications, and his sense of the larger design trends and ethos around typography at the current moment. So he's got quite a large body of work, and just to kind of give you an overview, here's a timeline of his professional career, and this kind of also illustrates the structure of my presentation and illustrates his discovery and kind of growing interest in typography. So to kick things off, when David Jonathan Ross entered college at Hampshire College in Massachusetts, he did not really have any direction or understanding of what he wanted to do. He was interested in art and he was interested in design, but he did not have a particular fondness for typography until starting to work with local publishers and school newspapers. So after college, just to briefly run through these three kind of realms, in 2006, he joined the Font Bureau Foundry as a typography designer. And at this point in time, the Font Bureau Foundry and kind of foundries in general were starting to get a grasp on what the implications were for digital design and how it could potentially change typography, and how this effect would maybe change the industry or maybe change what designers in font foundries were working on fundamentally. So that is also an interesting period in David Jonathan Ross's career. By 2016, Jonathan Ross had decided to form his own font foundry called DJR. Very creative name. But no, and at this point, Jonathan Ross had not only gotten experience with maybe more unconventional or niche typography applications, but he had also been at kind of the forefront of digital typography and the guidelines and constraints and benefits of digital typography. So these three areas are kind of what we're going to dive into more closely right now. So to kick things off, in college, at Hampshire College, Jonathan Ross basically was given, and every student was given, almost free rein over their curriculum and education. It was very unconventional in the sense of how open Hampshire College kind of allowed students to explore and investigate different areas of study kind of just in a free-form manner. Before this, Jonathan Ross had experience, with cartooning or cartoonists, and also kind of illustration at large. But he really did not have much of a direction coming into Hampshire College. As time grew on, he became particularly interested in writing and kind of journalism through the school newspaper. And by his senior year, his thesis project was a typeface called Climax. and it first debuted in the school newspaper. And one really interesting benefit to this system, or this opportunity in DJR's thesis project, was being able to continually update and refine this typeface as prints were going out. So he could, test a design in a short batch run through the newspaper at Hampshire College, and tweak it and perfect it as time went on. Jonathan Ross said, "Because we ran a newspaper, we could sub in any font we wanted. I was able to develop this font and use it live. Every issue could have a different version of the font. I used to go back and readjust things that didn't work well." So I think this is a very unique opportunity to really adapt and adjust and tweak a typeface that not every designer or not every typeface has the opportunity to do. It's a continual, iterative exploration of typography. So this is kind of his foundation for typography and type design. It took inspirations from several, kind of newspaper conducive typefaces, but also put a twist on it with very delicate and elegant details, and some geometric elements too. So he was by no means an expert at this point, but having the opportunity and kind of the free rein to revise and update this typeface throughout his senior year was incredibly useful to him. So moving on to another thing that he has continually explored throughout his career, but kind of found and fell for in college, was horizontal stress typefaces. So this is kind of like a whole unconventional experimental realm, which grew out of a movement in the first half of the 20th century, and started primarily in Italy. So reverse stress or horizontal stress typefaces put more emphasis on what we conventionally see as thinner regions or areas of a character or a form. And this creates a really interesting, what they call railroading effect, where there are there's a track at the top and the bottom, and it really emphasizes the horizontal nature of a term or a body of type, or how it's set. So Jonathan Ross, I think went into this with a good deal of skepticism, but maybe also saw the illustrative and kind of more expressive qualities of a horizontal stress / reverse stress typeface, and didn't necessarily see like some of the criticisms of it that maybe a more experienced or jaded type designer might have seen. So we might be used to seeing horizontal stress typefaces in the realm of like a Western, spaghetti Western wanted poster, or some sort of parody, something along those lines. But the design applications are actually very, very interesting for horizontal stress. And this kind of speaks to David Jonathan Ross's broader perspectives as he got more interested and more involved in typography and type design, that not everything needs to be, a sans serif, bold, Helvetica essentially typeface. That's not necessarily the holy grail. In fact, the type designer who first released Helvetica in its first form, before that had created a horizontal stress typeface. So this is a really great entree into alternative type, more specific type, and kind of turning the typographic conventions on their head. So while he was working on Climax, he also developed what later became known as manicotti, which is a horizontal stress typeface built around some of these inspirations on the prior page. And this really emphasizes the rail phenomena in horizontal stress typefaces, and also painstakingly, kind of redistributes the counterform and form relationship within a type family. So David Jonathan Ross has spoken at great length about how much counterform, even if it's very small or relatively unassuming, can make a really large difference in how especially a reverse stress typeface is perceived. So this has been an ongoing project for DJR, but he first developed it and kind of cooked it up at Hampshire College while he was working on some other more conventional typefaces. Jonathan Ross himself said, manicotti taught me how to cheat, how to create reverse stress and counterforms. And I think he's referencing the idea of unconventional or expressive typefaces, how to bend the rules of typography to create a new solution, which I think is incredibly important for any designer to be open to doing. So from the very start, Jonathan Ross was balancing kind of this understanding and respect for type tradition and conventional type tradition, while also incorporating this kind of looser, more playful, more explorative understanding of what type can do, which I think is really important. So moving on, this dynamic brought him, and this growing interest brought him to the Font Bureau Foundry in 2006. So Jonathan Ross, right out of college, had really fallen for type in a wide range of formats or applications or experiences, whether it's something as quirky as manicotti or as applicable and useful as Climax. So one of the first major projects that he got at the Font Bureau was to take this modern font called Forma, developed in the 1930s, and modernize it and digitize it. Forma was known kind of as a response to some other sans serifs, but was known for its very tight tracking and also kind of snug curved forms. So while it might look pretty conventional for sans serif, there are small details in this typeface that help it really shrink down in terms of width, and also from a physical foundry perspective, in the 30s, this had to be done with metal castings. So shrink down not only the forms, but also shrink down the block which the forms are mounted and carved into. So this was quite a technical effort at the time, and to digitize it and modernize it was also an effort in its own right. So what Forma really brought to the forefront and the Type Foundry was focused on was the idea of referencing the past and bringing it into a more modern digital context. Much of the experiments from the 20th century in terms of sans serif, font faces had been forgotten in early web development. So foundries had been experimenting with this digitization effort to take lessons from physical type and bring it into a digital setting, whether it be early versions of programs like InDesign or Illustrator, or straight to web publishing. So Forma was an early example of this, and in many ways kind of set the trend for more niche typefaces being implemented on the web. So as you can see, the tracking and the letter forms are very tightly packed together in Forma, almost to the point where they blend together. And it emphasizes this level of flow, horizontal flow across the characters. So David Jonathan Ross spearheaded this project at the Font Bureau and really got down into the details of these characters and made some minor adjustments for the digital world, including refining these curves that you can see here on the left, these very, very subtle indents that really help pack the letter forms in together. Jonathan Ross said about Forma that this was my first time working so directly from a source. I did do some tracking at first to help get general contrast and proportions, but when you get down to that level of detail, the scans from Indra's proofs of the metal type were different than the scans of the specimen. By that point, the digital Forma had a life of its own, and the scans were more of a reference, giving me a general sense of how the certain characters were drawn or how tightly text should be spaced at that size. So you can see, Jonathan Ross using these sources as references while also taking liberties to adjust it to a completely different medium and format that the original designer could not have anticipated. So Jonathan Ross really struck a balance between respecting this historical reference while also making it work and making it viable in a digital context. This balance, I think, has only grown more pertinent and important as more design is done through the web and on the web and primarily built for the web. Understanding the predisposed notions of something like typography or other realms of design, knowing the history behind it, but also being able to adapt it and not being precious with it. And this study took over a year of development and continued on for several years after that to build out all of the weights and all of the special characters, and ultimately a variable typeface, which we'll get to a little bit later. And as you can see on this slide, Forma was a very applicable font, and still is, certainly. This trend towards sans serif, kind of more bold geometric forms, was a perfect application for a typeface like Forma. So you can see Forma used in publishing, you can see it used in digital applications. It's a very versatile and slightly unique font while still respecting some of the age-old lessons of typography. So in 2016, Jonathan Ross formed DJR, his own font foundry, which was an attempt to balance this understanding and respect for more conventional typefaces, while also emphasizing and really trying to give access to more unconventional, more playful and more experimental type families. Jonathan Ross said about this subject, there are already a ton of fonts out there to choose from. That's why I make fonts that challenge you to set your work apart by going beyond the generic workhorses and confronting the unique visual and technical demands of your text. So DJR was formed with this in mind, giving people different options and different opportunities to really set their design apart or get creative, get playful with typography. And DJR also brought over some of David Jonathan Ross's prior experiments, including Forma, Manicotti, and many others that he had been working on over the past decade and more. So DJR was kind of its culmination of, more than a decade of knowledge and kind of a new understanding of what typography could be. One of the foremost fonts in DJR's catalog that has gotten a lot of use and has many applications is called Fit. Fit is kind of the epitome of a digital-first typeface. Digital first in the sense that Fit is meant to fit anywhere. There are just an infinite amount of varieties of Fit, and its intention is to be as adaptable, as flexible as a typeface could possibly be. At the same time, it's referencing these kind of more brutalist forms and understandings that we've certainly seen in typography before, but mixing it and hybridizing it with this ability in a digital realm to stretch it and form it to any situation or any composition. So Fit is a very unique and applicable typeface at the same time, kind of pulling in from both of these areas and making a very expressive result. Fit is also one of the early explorations and investments by DJR into a variable typeface, essentially meaning that the designer or the user has the opportunity to set the weight on a range. So there are almost infinite amount of possibilities with a variable font like Fit. Diving more into the variability of Fit, you can see the applications in something like the size or variation in window size on the web. This is something that DJR has talked about extensively, is being able to unify your message and keep it consistent across various widths or various canvas sizes that we run into across the web. And you can see here at the top as well how when the weight is increased on a variable typeface such as Fit, the height is also stretched, so it stays concentric and it stays uniform across this wide range of variability. So Fit was a really foundational typeface for DJR and got a lot of acclaim and was used in several applications, whether that's in a physical form or in a digital form. A typeface made for the web and made for the variability of the web also was incredibly useful for something like publication, logo design, or even something like silk screening, because you can set the canvas width and height and really get into granular control of this typeface. So that's Fit. So even over this 20-year exploration that David Jonathan Ross has been on, there are a lot of transitions that you can see along the way. Here on the left is the ampersand from Manicotti, and on the right is the ampersand from Fit. And you can see the similarities, you can see maybe the evolution of DGR's style and his knowledge and understanding of both an applicable typeface, but also a unique, distinct, playful one at the same time. And I would argue that Manicotti and Fit are both fall into that category. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this 20-year career, and there are many typefaces that I haven't covered, such as Roslindale, Input, Turnip, kind of straddling this balance between usability and applicability and, identity and character and expression. And this is kind of what DGR has grown to be known for, is this balance, this very careful balance between these two extremes. And you can also see, some of these typefaces, while they might not look as if they would read at a smaller size, or maybe they shouldn't be displayed as a display or a banner font. They're more adaptable than they might seem. Even a font like Fit, while I might not recommend using that as your body type size, it's more adaptable in scale and size than one might think it is. So that's my quick presentation on David Jonathan Ross. He's a typographer with a focus on alternative approaches, creative solutions, and type across mediums. Whether that means publishing something in a magazine or creating a web typeface that works on any screen size. David Jonathan Ross has spent the greater part of his career working towards this approach of unique and expressive typefaces that can be used and accessed by virtually anyone. So I encourage you to go check out his work and maybe download some of his fonts through our educational license. And use them, explore them. I think personally they're incredibly adaptable. They have a wide range of usage, and they're very accessible while being expressive and unconventional and maybe a little bit different, which I think is exactly what DGR's intention is, to create alternative expressive solutions to what has otherwise been mostly fraught with sans serif compositions or display fonts or layouts. And I think that there's room for more character and more expression, which you can certainly find in David Jonathan Ross's work. Thank you. Another program that DGR has started across its Foundry network is a Font of the Month program, and I would encourage people to sign up for that as well. It's a very creative and interesting approach to typography, and maybe it challenges the designer to use or explore more typefaces that are out of the realm of what they're used to. So you can find more information about that at dhr.com as well.